Hello, everybody. You are very welcome to this Paisley Book Festival event. My name is Hilary Copeland. We're really delighted to be part of the festival, and today's event is with the writer Jan Carson, and we will be talking about her new novel, The Raptures. Paisley Book Festival is now in its third year and has been developed as part of Future Paisley, a wide-ranging programme of events, activity and investment using the town's unique and internationally significant cultural story to transform its future. Since 2022 is the Year of Scotland Stories, the theme of this year's festival is Stories Mak Us, as we ask authors and audiences to reflect on the transformational power of stories in our lives, how they shape, how they reshape our identities, and offer us support through difficult times. If you haven't already, please go online and check out all of the other events the festival has to offer. And following the success of our digital festival in 2021, this year's festival takes a hybrid format with many events taking place live in Paisley, whilst others are streaming digitally on YouTube online. Films from a selection of live events will also be uploaded to the YouTube channel in the days after they've taken place, and all of the digital content is free to access. We're really grateful for your support, so please do come along to events in person, and please consider making a donation to the festival to help us put more events on just like this and to support reading and writing. Please visit paisleybookfest.com/support and you'll be able to find out how you can do that. If you're watching online, you can check out the online festival bookshop at bookshop.org, which supports independent bookshops throughout the UK. And if you're watching live, you can pop some questions in the chat or on the platform that you're watching us on. If you're on social media, you can give us a follow at @BookPaisley on Twitter, @PaisleyBookFest on Instagram, and you can mention the hashtag PBF2022. So a very warm welcome to you all today. Thank you so much for joining us wherever you may be. Today's event, The Raptures by Jan Carson, is the novel that we will be talking about today. And a little heads up for anyone who isn't familiar with the book, there is a recurring theme of illness and child death, which is treated with lots of empathy, lots of good dark humour, but please do bear that in mind if it's a topic that you would rather avoid. Jan, you're very welcome today. How are you?
I'm good, Hilary. Yeah, a little bit cold. We've had snow today in here in Northern Ireland. I'm not sure if people in Scotland are getting snow as well, but it's a bit chilly.
Well, we're really delighted that you're joining us. A little bit of a background on Jan. She is a writer and community arts facilitator based in Belfast, and you are coming to us live from Belfast today. And we're really delighted to be celebrating your latest novel, which is your 7th publication. Am I right there, Jan?
Yeah, it's kind of scary hearing that, but it's 7th publication, 3rd novel.
3rd novel, and it's really great. It was published by Doubleday just in January 2022. Can we have a little look at the book, Jan? I'm sure you have a copy.
Indeed. I actually, as you can see, here is the front cover, and I have managed to come dressed as my book today, which is no mean feat, to be honest.
I think that would be a great World Book Day idea. Dress as instead of dressing as a character, you dress as a book cover.
Oh, I would love it. If any of your children want to come as my book cover, I will heavily endorse that. I really love the design of this, to be honest. It was a designer called Irina Martinez Costa who did the design work. She's done 2 of my books now. And I know you're not supposed to judge a book by its cover, but I've had a fair few people who have picked it up just because of the cover, so I'm very grateful to them. Hopefully they're not disappointed when they read the bit inside.
It's a great looking book cover, and I have had many comments very similarly. Now tell me, I have heard that there has been some fan art in response to the cover. Is that right?
Yeah, I've had a couple of different. I meant to grab them and I've forgotten to. I've had a couple of different young fans do wonderful design work. And last night I found out there's a class in a local special needs school here in Belfast that are all working on an art project, recreating the cover of the Raptures. So that is wonderful, and I'm sure Irina will be really delighted to see all of the fan art as well.
I would really love to see some fan art in response to the Raptures and to today's event online. I'm going to go and look for that later on in case anybody feels so inspired. Jan, can I ask you a few questions about the novel? What we're going to be doing today is we're going to take some questions from people who might be watching at home. We'd also love to hear a little extract from the book if you would. Maybe you'd like to do that for us now.
Yeah, I'll give you a wee bit of context. As you very graciously mentioned at the start, Hilary, it is a book with quite a difficult premise. And definitely when my publishers heard that I wanted to run with a book which was about a kind of strange illness that sweeps through a community in the middle of a pandemic, they were like, this is going to be quite a hard sell. Um, it is set in 1993 in a fictional small village outside of Ballymena, which is where I grew up. Small rural Protestant community. And over the course of the summer, a lot of the children in the local primary school begin to get ill and unfortunately they die. I don't want to give too many spoilers away, so I'm going to read right from the start of the novel, just the first page and a half here. And the only thing you really need to know is that Ross, the first child, has just passed away. Ross had only just turned 11. He was still a child, though the thought of girls was already pressing. He'd sometimes go through the K's catalogue for pictures of women in bras and pants. He'd yet to touch a girl himself, had yet to taste coffee or travel anywhere in an airplane. He'd been looking forward to Lanzarote. It would have been his first time in a foreign place. Poor Ross. It's never easy going first. There's been no talk of the boys passing yet. It'll be mid-morning before the news spreads. In the houses and farms of Ballylack, people are getting on with their everyday doing. They're feeding the cows and drinking tea, watching the telly and heading to bed. There's no expectation that tomorrow will be much different from today. 93 has been an unremarkable year. The summer's shaping up to be equally forgettable. It's neither hot nor particularly damp. It isn't a World Cup year or one for the Olympics. Major's in Downing Street, Clinton's in the White House. Folks aren't sure what to make of him. Keep an eye on that one. He's got notions, they like to say. There's talk of Clinton wading into the troubles. Word is, he thinks he can sort it out. Let the same fella have a run at it. Better than him have tried and failed. Down south, Ireland win the Eurovision for the umpteenth year in a row. In Your Eyes is the song in question. You'd have a hard time dancing to it, though it's got a catchy hook. Makes a change from the usual earnest shout. Plonk, 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 and words about peace. What are the young ones listening to? Shaggy, Ace of Base, Too Unlimited, feel good Euro hits. Well, they don't sound half so feel good, pumping through the tinny speakers of the GAA clubs and community centres where Ulster's youth hang out. Dancing, smoking, drinking cheap vodka decanted into Fanta bottles. No, no limits will reach for the sky, the youngsters sing, fists pumping furiously to the beat, black bomber jackets soaking up their sweat. They go buck mad every time No Limits comes on. Sure, it's only a tune to them, not the call to arms it could be. No limits, indeed. What a load of bollocks. These kids hail from Aucher, Clocher, and Callybackie. Say it out loud. Callybackie. Sure, you can practically hear the fences. They couldn't be more limited if they tried. Elsewhere in the province, they're still at it, killing each other with bombs and guns. It's the 23rd or 4th summer of this nonsense. Depends on when you started keeping count. Most folks are fed up with the whole thing. They're adamant the killing must stop. There's war in Bosnia and Afghanistan. There's a brutal one winding up in Rwanda. You can't turn on your telly for seeing dead bodies piled everywhere. Blood pooling in the gutters, women howling and getting on. The people here are sick of death. This isn't a third world country. This is Britain. Or this is Ireland. Or both. Or neither. Or its own institution, peculiar as a maiden aunt. Either way, it's a civilised country. It's been a whole 2 years since McDonald's arrived. I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Jan. That's brilliant. Um, you mentioned very briefly there that your publisher said, so a novel where a number of children contract a mystery illness and die could be a bit of a hard sell. Could you maybe talk to us a little bit about the writing of the Raptures? Because I'm sure some people now, 2 years into this pandemic, might find it quite hard to believe, but that COVID-19 was something we hadn't heard of whenever you
Yeah.
started writing this.
So it actually, bizarrely, it was finished and handed in November 2019, so long before any of us. I think COVID was just beginning to be talked about before Christmas that year, but the idea of a global pandemic wasn't on the radar. I had wanted to write something. The sort of story structure that I was following, it's basically the Pied Piper storyline of, what happens when the children of a small community are impacted, and there's one left behind. So Hannah is the chief narrator of the story. She's 11 years old and the only kid who seems to be able to survive through this mysterious illness, which comes with them kind of a mixed bag of both relief and also a terrible weight of guilt, both on her and her parents. Um, in some ways, Hilary, I think the cover was kind of created to offset what went on the back cover of the blurb, because we really struggled to find something that would get people to pick the book up. Because, as soon as you say this is a book about children dying, an epidemic, and evangelical Protestantism, can see the readers running for the door. And I hope maybe from that little excerpt you pick up, it's actually quite a funny book as well. Yes, it tackles a lot of quite dark, heavy themes, but there's a real sort of seam of humour running through it as well.
There is. It's laced, and with every scene that has a sort of a shocking moment, you get a laugh, you get that relief from it. I for one definitely am not a fan of anything that could be considered pandemic art. It just was a bit too close for comfort for me. But I never got that sense from reading the Raptures. In fact, for me, one thing that I thought was really interesting about this novel was the mystery element. There is a mystery to unravel
Mm.
in this book, which is what's going on. Why are these children experiencing this illness, and why is it that Hannah seems to have remained somehow apart? What is it about mystery and the idea of mysteries in books that really drew you to including this in your novel?
Well, I will talk about mysteries in books in a little second because there's no subject I like to talk about more. But I'll be honest, it didn't have that at the start. I have a really, really good editor, and she saw the potential for it to have much more of a kind of thriller, like, mystery element to it. And so there was an enormous rewrite in this novel. The back was actually moved to the front. So I'm really trying hard not to give spoilers, but in the original kind of draft, we found out right at the start who was responsible and what the kind of epidemic was. And now that's held very much to the end of the book. And for anyone who's listening who's a writer, that is such a nightmare of an edit to receive in your inbox. Can you just flip the whole book back to front? It's basically a rewrite, but I can see now she was completely spot on. That kind of tension that comes through the whole way, I think really it pulls the plot along, and it distracts you from the fact that, yeah, okay, 11 children are actually dying in this book. Um, I love, love, love mysteries. And I particularly, as some of you might know, I'm a little bit obsessed with Agatha Christie. So if you look in the bookshelves behind me, you'll probably find Agatha peering at you from somewhere. In 2020, I read all of her novels in order from start to finish because it was her centenary. And I think what I love about mysteries, and what I think many people were drawn to during the pandemic, was actually this sense of reassurance and comfort that
Mm-hmm.
comes from a mystery solved, justice done, the perpetrators sent to prison or punished for what they do. And Christie was the master of that. It's actually the opposite of upsetting if something awful happens and then there's a fixable solution to it. It goes against this chaotic madness that we're living in at the minute, where often there isn't an easy solution to it. Orwell writes very, very well about it. There's a great Orwell essay about the kind of comfort of a good English murder. So definitely, I wanted to make sure there was some level of justice in the Raptures as well, and perhaps that against the backdrop of the Troubles in Northern Ireland, where justice it hasn't always been easily served. It's reassuring for folks to see something that does have a conclusion and repercussions.
Yeah, I think we can all really relate to that feeling of looking for something that ties up in some way, that is more satisfying than the reality. You mentioned that Hannah is the sort of main character of this book. She is 11 years old. She lives in a rural village in Northern Ireland in 1993. Where did Hannah come from? What drew you to writing most of this novel from the perspective of a child?
Yeah, so it's very much Hannah's world. The first and the final chapters are in first person, the rest is in a very close kind of third. So we are seeing it from the perspective of Hannah and her classmates. I think child narrators are brilliant. As a writer, they're a real kind of sneaky device that you can use to ask difficult searching questions and often get across a big chunk of exposition in a way that doesn't feel preachy. So, close to the start of the novel, Hannah asks a lot of questions about the situation in Northern Ireland and the troubles and what is peace, and you can, a child can ask those innocently. They become a bit cloying in the mouth of someone who's older who should know the answers already. And I think she also gets to be deliberately provocative. So Hannah's parents are these um, very, very conservative, charismatic Christians. And there's one point where she asks, why do we always pray for Auntie Rachel who's living in sin, but we never actually go to see her or have her around for dinner? And she's pointing out the hypocrisy of her parents in a really subtle, innocent way. So um, I think child narrators are really fun to write. And I put a lot of myself into Hannah. She's very me at that age. I also have an absolute gift of an 11-year-old niece. So I was running a lot of the dialogue and the word phrasing through. Is that something that she would actually say? So she was just a joy to write, as were some of the other classmates that you get to meet across the novel too.
Maybe I could ask you a little bit about that actually, because that you just mentioned the narration. We start off from Hannah's point of view, but then we also get to follow very closely the other children from the other families in this small community. I really enjoyed that. I sort of felt like I was getting like a little drone eye view,
Yeah, yeah.
landing in every bedroom and every living room to follow them. So there are it's quite a big ensemble cast in this novel. How
Yeah.
did you set about creating that world and filling it with such fully realized people?
I was actually thinking, I was doing an interview from the French translation this morning about it, and I asked about the same thing. And I don't think I could possibly write a big international novel with a scope that crosses, continents and goes all over the world. I like a closed set.
Mm-hmm.
It's quite a big closed set. So the Firestarters, my last novel, was set in East Belfast, and it was the streets around where I live. And you had a lot of characters, but it felt like there was almost a boundary round, and I had to visualize that, and that became even more kind of pertinent with the Raptures. Like I felt I had to get Ballylack in my head. I drew maps. I knew who lived in which house, where the little shop was, and the GP surgery, and the churches. And I felt when I was, going to write it, I'm a coffee shop writer, so I walk 20 minutes to my coffee shop every day. And I felt like I was almost going up the road into Ballylack, imagining where everyone was and where I left them the day before. And then I also did a very sneaky thing where I wrote a short story about each of the characters beforehand. So each of the children had a little short story, which was not in the context of the epidemic. It was the summer before. And I got to know each of them in their own families and their issues and the way they react. So it was felt quite easy to plonk them down into the middle of this pressurized situation and then just let them be themselves. So this is, I'm actually got a prop with me. This is Bayani's story, which is he's one of the main characters in it. He's a mixed race kid. His mum's Filipino and his dad is a farmer. And this is the backstory about the night he gets sent to the Young Farmers Club, which doesn't go very well because Bayani has absolutely no interest in being a farmer. But just even writing that, it was much easier then to put him into the world of this really, really difficult summer that they're all going through.
You knew them all really well by that point.
Yeah, and like I actually, there's some of them I quite miss now, and I feel like I want to continue, like Hannah in particular, and there's a couple of others I got very fond of.
I am very fond of Grandpa Pete. I'd say he probably is my outline favorite. And what I really loved about him is these lovely, touching moments with Hannah. I'd say Grandpa Pete would be Hannah's closest confidant. And certainly Hannah isn't as close to the children in the village in the
Mm.
way that she is with Grandpa Pete. He seems to present quite an alternative version of traditional masculinity, and that is an idea that sort of I kept looking at with those characters around the village, particularly with a lot of the fathers who we meet along the way. Would you talk to us a little bit about some of those depictions?
Yeah, I really like writing male characters, and I often have people come up and my last novel was two male narrators, and I would get asked, why do you not write strong women? Like, where are the women? I think Northern Irish men are incredibly complex, and there's a lot to work with there, particularly in terms of how they express themselves and um, a lot of mental health issues. So, understandably, there is a legacy of trauma here in Northern Ireland. There's also a legacy of incredibly tight conservative religion and religiosity. And so there's a cast of characters in the Raptures who are all trying to present themselves as strong, functional men. There's a particularly kind of disturbing scene that I really enjoyed writing, where the fathers form a kind of vigilante posse and they go out to try and find who's responsible for making their children ill, and they don't. It's almost like they're acting the role of something. They talk about how they've seen this on the TV, so they know how they're supposed to act, but not really what they're doing. And Grandpa Pate stands in a kind of contrast to that because he is quite articulate about his uncertainty. So he talks a lot about, religion in Northern Ireland and how, he doesn't know where you go after you die, and he doesn't know who's right and who's wrong. And Hannah actually seems to find that quite reassuring, the honesty that comes from him about not having all of the answers, about being vulnerable, about being gentle with her. Um, and so he was a really fun character to write as well, and I'm quite fond of him too.
The that idea of sort of being set apart from quite a traditional or perhaps conservative background or community is something that you seem to have returned to quite a lot in your work. For anybody who might be on BBC Sounds, currently available is an essay that was aired on BBC Radio 3 back in December 21, which was called Tray Bakes, and that was part of another Northern Ireland series you were asked to contribute to, Jan. What I loved about that is that you were talking very personally about the observing the role of women in perhaps
Mm.
for that it was a Presbyterian or Protestant tradition in Northern Ireland, and that idea of soft power, which I think comes across so well in the Raptures, that who is getting to make the decisions, but who is also contributing to the fabric of a community and building that up behind the scenes. What is it about women's experience in a sort of traditional or more conservative background that you keep coming back to?
I think a bit like the male characters I've just talked about, I think they're incredibly complex and they sometimes become reduced down to these stereotypes and pastiches in the art that I've seen looking at kind of women. So, the Mrs. Doyle character coming at you with the teapot constantly, and the Irish mammy who's always, you're not going out dressed like that. And they become these unhelpful stereotypes sometimes. And what I observed growing up, and I grew up in a very conservative religious community, Presbyterian, that did not allow women any voice really, and no leadership roles. But what I very much found was that, to be very honest, there were some strong men, but there was quite a lot of weak men who were propped up by their wives, and you could see that the thoughts were being planted in their head, the ideas, the kind of how things should change were all kind of coming trickling down. This notion of soft power that you talk about, but it was the men who actually got to stand up at the front and say, "We're doing this," or "Let's change things," or "I'm going to do the sermon this week." So I had that in my head. I also had this sense that comes across very much in the Tribex essay that you talk about, where women have this network of support. So, the funerals, the weddings, the looking after each other when there's an illness, is an incredible amount of power that comes through being there to hold each other together and to support and to offer community. And it's never acknowledged. If you think even about that kind of amount of learnt understanding and wisdom that's built up, it's never acknowledged. It's never kind of said, these women are amazing, they're really strong, they hold this place together. And it's there too in the Raptors, particularly with Hannah's mum. I mean, I want it to create something that young women reading this book who are coming from those backgrounds would find it inspiring, that they could look at Hannah's mum and maybe say, right, I'm going to go on a journey towards more autonomy as a woman.
Mm-hmm.
But it's desperately hard to write that and keep your characters believable, because those extremely tight religious communities, as a woman, as you if you start to challenge or express dissent or demand leadership, you're out. You know, I ask myself, why have we not got more texts that come from this conservative evangelical Protestant background, both in Northern Ireland and Scotland as well? Um, and it's because it's almost impossible to challenge from within in the same way as it would be impossible to challenge from within, really conservative Muslim communities or Hasidic Jewish communities. The lines are there and it's hard to kind of move across them. So I want it to take Hannah's mum goes on an extremely subtle journey where she's beginning to ask questions. She's beginning to challenge these status quo. She's beginning to try and inspire Hannah to stand up
Mm-hmm.
for herself.
Mm-hmm.
But it's subtle and they're small little moves. But I think they're quite huge for her. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And I think because we're seeing a lot of that sort of nearly absorbed by Hannah or through her eyes, the small is quite monumental,
Yeah.
actually, in the tightness of Ballylack and in that small world. There's something that I really thought about when I was reading this book about the space you have given to grief. And that's really understandable given the subject matter that we've touched on. There's obviously, with a lot of children dying in this book, space for grief and that depiction of grief is really important. But there's also something that's quite particular to the culture if in Northern Ireland and on the island of Ireland of wakes. And I wondered if you could maybe talk a little bit about depicting the various different backgrounds of the
Mm.
families who we see and their responses to things that are sometimes mystifying traditional, and why is it done this way, but also the importance of that. And I think your Trebeck's essay also touches on that. It's mostly women who are in a kitchen or in a church hall helping out with the wake, but that emotional support isn't often found outside of these islands. That the idea of waking and appreciation and finding space to hold our dead is really significant here.
Yeah, it's actually lovely having this conversation with hopefully Scottish folks listening in, because I think some of those traditions really cross across the wee bit of sea between us. And I really resonate there. I did another sneaky thing with the Raptures. I know I've talked about child narrators. I also plunked a Catholic in the middle of it. So we have a man called Sean Donnelly who's sent in to be the kind of conflict negotiator and like help the community move forward. And that gives me an eye to kind of comment on some of those weird things that you're talking about, Hilary, because he's looking at the whole scope of different denominations and versions of Protestant culture and how they respond to the tragedy in different ways. And one of my favourite scenes is where he goes into a room where there's clearly been a lot of tension. And these are like, totally no alcohol kind of families that I'm talking about. And he just looks at them all being really raging with each other, but not saying anything. And he's like, these Protestants need to get pissed drunk and just that he's
The
just
alphabet
reacting,
steam.
yeah, that to that sense of kind of, oh, like why? Um, and I also there's a part in it which is a really small couple of chapters, but I really or a couple of paragraphs, but I really wanted it in there. But Gracie's the funeral directors who prepare all of the children's bodies for burial, and how much he takes on board, Mr. Gracie takes on board that as a sense of a huge honor to be able to do that for the community, that he's guiding them through their hardest, darkest experiences. And that's something I saw as well, that there are people who guided families through awful things during the troubles, and their very presence was reassuring. um and yeah, so I wanted to do a whole scope swing across that. There's not just one version of Protestant culture in the North. And there's a line that Granda Pate says near the start, Protestants are like potatoes. There's 50 different varieties, but when you peel them back, they all look the same to me. And it's true and it's not true. There are subtle differences between each of the families and how they respond. Um, but yeah, I think how we talk about death in the North is a huge thing.
Mm.
And I actually, my next book that I'm going to work on is all about death. So brilliant. The publishers are going to love that one.
I think they will if the reception of the Raptors is anything to go to. I think they'll be thrilled about this. We've talked and touched on the Northern Irish context. The location of this book takes place in rural Northern Ireland. There is a lot of Northern Ireland thing comes up in your writing. I really loved the language because I am from Northern Ireland. So there is, for me, I find it really comforting to read words that I know are particular to this place. And I thought it gave a really distinct sense of the place and the world that you were trying to convey, and where the characters were located. But tell me a little bit about what you were trying to convey with your use of language, and particularly to people who are maybe not as familiar with Northern Ireland.
Yeah, I mean, this is a kind of bugbear of mine, and I got really angry and then just decided to do what I wanted anyway. Um, so, you know, growing up in Northern Ireland, we had lots of books about that, you know, set in Ireland in general, but there was very little that I saw that reflected my own experience, the kind of um, way we lived, but also kind of the language and the colloquialisms and the way we told stories and all of those things. And I when you don't see your story and your way of telling a story anywhere else, it begins to make you question the validity of it. So I had that in the back of my head, and then I've always been drawn to magical realism. So I've read a load of writing from South America, and I kept seeing the way like some of my favorite writers from there were dropping in Spanish words or Portuguese words. They were using, you know, foods and festivals and holy days and pieces of like really strange ways of structuring dialogue, and they were getting away with it. In fact,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes people were giving them bigger prizes for it, and it seemed to be going down okay. And I all of this was in the back of my head, and I think it only kind of came together when Anna Burns put out Milkman,
Mm.
and I realized how unapologetically Northern Irish it is in its language. It's a story that is told in a Northern Irish way, using Northern Irish words, Northern Irish language. When you hear her read it out loud, it just clicks. You get
Mm.
it. And oh, look, it actually did quite well for her. So I don't know why we've been apologizing for ourselves for so long, you know,
Mm.
saying, um, I'm gonna put in the words the Good Friday Agreement here, and then put a little like bracket. This was a peace treaty signed in 1998 in Northern Ireland. No one else in the world has to do that. Why do we have to explain ourselves? So I went full on Northern Irish in this, and it's not even just Northern Irish. This is pure Ballymena. So it's it actually might be interesting because there's probably a lot of Scottish listeners who will pick up some of the terms, lovely Ulster Scots words that have roots in Scots Gaelic that are just what I grew up with, and they're so fun to read and so fun to write. And I haven't had anything negative yet. I've had readers saying that they've learnt new words and
Mhm.
that, you know, they're trying to use them, which is brilliant.
Yes, I'm a big fan. And I think the best writers to me give their readers a lot of credit. Like, you can go and find these things out, or you don't have to, and you can let it wash over you as you're reading it. And that's the reader gets to choose how they
Yeah,
want to take that and what they want to do with it. Um, if they want to incorporate the word gurning into their everyday life, so be it. It's up to
yeah.
them.
I mean, I remember hearing Emer McBride say once, you know, like about her use of language, and she's very avant-garde with it, but, you know, her saying, like, there is a thing called Google. You can go
Yeah.
away, and if you're stuck, find out what something means. The world is a different world that, you know, we're in, but, you know, we've just had the centenary of Ulysses, and Joyce did so many interesting things in Ulysses with language and bits of language from other countries and places that, you know, it just makes sense in the context of Ulysses. That's what it is to be a writer, to see words as building blocks and things to play with rather than constraints.
Yeah, yeah. Nobody said, "Can you give us the dictionary, please, James Joyce, to help us through this?" I have to say, my personal favorite was sprockle, which I don't come across very often, and I only
We
ever
say
have.
sprachel.
Yeah, I've heard that in my family,
So we say
but
sprachel.
not outside my family. Well, definitely the use by those of us who do ungracefully sprockle over fences or
Yeah.
over ditches. That's how we say it. But I like that we all can
Yeah,
decide how we want to pronounce it.
there was the whole debate around the spelling of boke, which is a Northern Irish term for throwing up. And I stupidly asked on Twitter, how would you go about spelling boke? And then got 2 days of every single regional variation of boke, which after about half an hour began to feel really offensive, just getting constant tweets with the word boke in them. So
I think a
be
lot of
careful where you
Scottish
do your
listeners,
research.
there'll be a lot of Scottish listeners or viewers who will really relate to that. The detail of who was right in which small town land that we're that we're
Do
fighting
they
over.
boke in Scotland as well?
It's a great question. Maybe someone could pop
I
that in
used
the
to live
chat and
there.
let us know. I don't recall anybody. Well, they perhaps did both, but I don't remember anybody saying that they did. Someone can let us know
Yeah,
if you're familiar in various different parts of Scotland.
high literary chat here.
Exactly. We actually have some great questions that have come in from some of the people who have been listening to us and watching. So we're really delighted to have those. Just keeping on the same theme, Jan, one question here is how do you feel about using the vernacular yourself?
I was thinking about this today because I'm going to meet a friend from high school today that I haven't seen in 5 years tonight for a drink, and I realised that I speak different from how I spoke 5 years ago when I first started publishing books, and I
Mm-hmm.
think I've got much more comfortable with my Northern Irish accent and my Northern Irish phrasing and words, and it's the absolute working example of what I've just said about validity coming from seeing your story accepted and acknowledged and enjoyed. You
Mm-hmm.
know, my brother winds me up all the time that I'm getting more and more Ballymena the longer that I've lived away from it. But it's just like having people respond positively to those words, to the way that we tell stories, to the reference points. It makes you feel much more comfortable using them.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I've spent a long time. I did elocution lessons when I was a kid to try and learn how to speak posh and proper.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but everywhere I go in the world, I get people saying, "Oh, what a lovely accent! Like, hold on to your accent." And that it comes back again to that thing that we were talking about earlier with Anna Burns of, as being Northern Irish people, not apologising for who we are. Um,
Mm.
not just in terms of our language, but there was a long time where you walked into the room and said, "I'm from Belfast" or Northern Ireland, and there was a kind of like we were seen as the kind of troubling presence in the room,
Mm-hmm.
and that's not fair because it's a small little place that has an incredible amount of talent, much more than it should have proportionally, and a lot of wonderful people doing fantastic things. So I don't think we should be apologizing for ourselves any longer.
I think you've really hit on something there as well, which is for Hannah's the generation and the era that Hannah grew up in, then that was still Northern Ireland was still seen globally in particular light. And there's a line I think that you have in there that Jerry Adams has done so much talking that the BBC had to give him a new voice.
Yeah.
There historical ideas of accent and prejudice. And I think in the era that we live in today, that that generation and our generation feel really differently about the concept of
Mm.
Northern Ireland and the myriad of identities and meanings that that actually allows us to have.
Hmm. I think it's complex though, Els, because there. I don't want to once again give too many spoilers, but the book begins with the children being charged with the fact that they're the future of Northern Ireland, and can they write an essay about what Northern Ireland will be like when they're grown ups?
Mm-hmm.
And then they get a chance, a number of them anyway, get a chance to recreate Northern Ireland, to start afresh and have a go at building a utopia. And
Mm-hmm.
all they do is bring forward all of the old tensions and kind of prejudices that they had in the past. And I thought about that a lot when I was writing about it. The book begins with a quote from Lyra McKay, who wrote a lot about the ceasefire generation of kids who would be the future of Northern Ireland who hadn't directly experienced the Troubles. And I
Mm-hmm.
thought about the incredible pressure that we're putting on these kids who to fix things that they didn't break. They've inherited a mess here.
Mm-hmm.
All that's been modelled to them is sectarianism and prejudice. It's an enormous leap to go, right, off yous go and integrate and reconcile and be hopeful. And
Hmm.
yet we hold that intention with what's happening is a load of them are. There is a lot of inherited trauma here and a lot of kids that are struggling, but there are also a lot of young people that are doing incredible, amazing things that, make me feel old, but also inspired, at 42 to look at like the 20-year-olds who are writing incredible poetry and starting new arts venues and, um, challenging the political dinosaurs. It sort of makes me go, it's a bit of a kick up the backside to get on with it ourselves. So
Yeah.
those two things are in tension, I think, all the time.
And I think there's something amazing about this current generation, or Gen Z, or however we want to talk about them, who are really politically minded with a small p, and really are looking about representation and identity and the climate crisis. And they are all really tuned in to being active, and sort of understanding the active role they can take in shaping their society. And probably the connectivity of the world we live in has meant that for
Yeah.
young people in Northern Ireland, they have that global perspective as well.
See, that's one thing. Like I wanted to set the book. It's set in 1993, so that the peace talks begin in 94, I think. I wanted to set it before the 98 and the peace agreement because so they had a kind of window into the past. But I also wanted to set it before the advent of the internet
Hmm.
because I think the internet changed everything for kids. You and I both grew up in reasonably rural parts of Northern Ireland where your world was pretty much the kind of 10-mile radius around your house.
Hmm.
There weren't foreign films coming into my world. There weren't, pieces of translated literature from around the world or, political ideas about what was going on in other places. So the world was quite small. The internet has really opened it up for our kids to see, oh, you know, this is what young people are interested and care about in Scandinavia or South America or wherever.
Hmm.
And I think possibly that's part of the reason that they are so engaged and active now.
We've had a question from the audience on this very topic. Somebody has asked, Jan, how you would describe intergenerational relationships in Northern Ireland at the moment. Are young people increasingly disconnected from those traditional values?
I think whoever asked that, it's all how you define traditional values. So I think there is a real moving away from things like institutionalized religion. I think there's a real skepticism, perhaps is the word I'd use, about politics and the traditional political parties and political roots. But I think some of those traditional values, which I actually see as positive values about Northern Ireland, I've seen young people moving back towards them. So things like community and support and the young ones would probably say finding your tribe, but that sense of gathering people around you and protecting them and looking after them, those are hospitality values that I grew up with as hugely important. And I think this generation really value those things and I love it. I also love that there's this kind of value of kind of practical engagement. They seem to be quite a roll up your sleeves and get on with it sort of generation. If it's broken, you need to get in, fix it, start something, do something, make something. That's what I grew up with. Sometimes to a negative extent that, I lived in a world where we were the first people to arrive and the last people to leave, and you had to set the chairs up and clean it up afterwards and do everything. But I also love that I've inherited those kind of practical, very grounded values of getting on with it, and I see that there. Um, so there's a skepticism of institutionalized things. It's very, very understandable in Northern Ireland. There is nothing about most of the politicians that we have, and I'm using the term most carefully because we do have a few incredibly inspiring politicians, and I hate that they all get tarred with the same brush.
Mhm.
But for most of them, there's nothing that would inspire a young person to go into politics. There's very little about the big institutionalized Protestant denominations that would inspire young people to go there. They stuck their head in the sand and not embraced inclusion and um, not really showing that they care about climate activism. Certainly not being very supportive of anyone who's, from a queer background, any women. There's a lot of issues there that would make it I think a lot of young people would not see the any appeal in going down that route. So yeah, I mean, I get asked a lot. The question I get asked a lot is, "Are you hopeful about the future in Northern Ireland?" And I always say I'm super, super hopeful when I look at the young people. I think in 30 years' time, this place could be brilliant. They are not as obsessed with the kind of binaryisms of just voting on one issue. They don't care as much about us or them. They're interested in issues around class and gender and sexuality and the environment. But I'm also incredibly depressed because I think the dinosaurs that are in power at the minute who have the power to change legislation are going to hold on for so long that there might not be anything left for the kids to inherit. So I've kind of fluctuate between those 2 points. What do you think, Hills?
Well, I think that you are really spot on in sort of unpacking what we mean whenever we say things like traditional or conservative backgrounds, because or religious backgrounds, because what I know is that there are a lot of people who are maybe from a faith community in particularly in Northern Ireland where we are, who are really at the forefront of looking at social justice, or they're exploring equality, and they're looking at developing community and things that are really, I'm really delighted to see, and sort of trying to maybe come at that some of those values from a different perspective, and I think it's a definitely an and. At the same time, I also see a lot of people who have been hurt by religious institutions or particular practices, perhaps we could say, that were part of religious institutions, and that's not unique to any particular denomination in Northern Ireland, and it's certainly not unique to this place. That's something
Mm-hmm.
that is really really widely experienced. Um, Am I hopeful? I'm really hopeful because there are so many people who are doing great things here and now. I do really think that there is something in your novel that you address, which is this idea that the next generation is going to come along and fix everything. You and I would have been young people at the time of the peace agreement, of the Good Friday
Mm-hmm.
Agreement, and we heard that, we heard that the same way, and we are now fully fledged adults, and it seems to be okay to kick the can down the road for the next generation to sort that out. And actually there are lots of people with lots of power right now who could do quite a lot to address things.
Yeah. Should we take the question about which other Northern Irish writers are you excited about? Because that
Yeah,
follows on the back of like Northern Irish people doing exciting, brilliant things.
absolutely.
So someone has asked other Northern Irish writers that Scottish writers should be looking out for. Holy shit, this is the best year to be a Northern Irish writer since, I don't know, about 50 years.
The best
Um,
question to have asked you today, I think.
yeah, and then you just sort of have to take a deep breath and then go, there's millions of them. In the next 6 months, there is an absolute onslaught of fantastic Northern Irish writers publishing. So Wendy Erskine's short story collection Dance Move came out last week. You have Louise Kennedy's Trespasses coming very soon, which is an incredible novel. Lucy Caldwell's These Days in about 2 weeks' time, which is about the Blitz in Belfast. Michelle Gallen's follow-up to Big Girl Small Town, Factory Girls. I've read all of these, so I can vouch for all of them. Brilliant, very funny. Olivia Fitzsimmons, The Quiet Whispers Never Stop. Sue Divins, I've forgotten what hers is called, but it's good. CYA. A wreck of crime fiction writing, because the crime fiction guys get mad if I forget about them. They're really, really good. But Sharon Dempsey's got a novel out last week, which is great. David Park, Spies in Canaan, which I started this morning, is coming in the summer. And that's just a prose fiction. Bernie McGill, Sam Thompson, you're going to see Northern Irish writers all over prize lists this year. We've got Stacey Gregg has just brought out her first movie. She's a playwright from Northern Ireland. First feature out this week, Here Before. Fantastic. Hilary and I's good friend Dominic Montague had a play at the Lyric last week, which I'm hoping will get out of Northern Ireland, about the history of Cara Friend, which was the gay helpline, which was set up during the height of the Troubles to support people coming out in a really, really difficult background. It's called Callings. I could literally go on for about a million hours about how brilliant the artists are who are coming out of this neck of the woods. And considering there are only 1.7 million of us, about 1.2 million of us are publishing novels in the next 6 months.
One of the things, Jan, that I would really love to see is all of those amazing writers who you have just spoken about getting to bring their work, to bring their art to other people, and also to talk about some of the not Northern Irish elements of it. Because although I know hypocritically we have talked a lot about Northern Ireland today, one of the things that I really feel that I think other festivals and other locations could do is to look at these books and the universality of the work. And so many of those themes are really relevant to loads of us, no matter where we're featured. And Northern Irishness and all of the kind of the complexity of what that term might mean is just one part of lots of exciting stories that are coming out right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things I absolutely love the most, and it's a weird one, but the Firestarters, I won the EU Prize for Literature for it, and that makes you an EU laureate, and you have to travel all over Europe doing festivals and things like that. And you get to meet writers from other places. And I tend to get paired with writers from difficult places. But the universality of our story and how it translates and how it responds to other people's experiences of conflict, but also of things like women's rights and gender equality and class issues and things, it's fantastic. You know, I was talking this morning, one of my dear friends is a novelist from the Ukraine, and thankfully she's out, she's safely in Brussels at the minute. But Aska and I, over the years, have had so many conversations about how much we have in common rather than what we have as difference. And that's how you learn. You sit with people who your story resonates a little, but there's also things that you can learn from each other. So yeah, I'd love to get out and be paired with people who come from really different backgrounds to me. And so yeah, that would be very, very exciting.
A plea to festival programmers everywhere from this small place. One of the things, Jan, that I know you've spoken about recently is in the novel, and you did give it a good name check at the beginning of this event, was the Europop that was everywhere in 1993. Anyone who has read the Raptures or will be reading the Raptures will be singing "No Limits" by Two Unlimited for days on end afterwards, and that's a great example of the universality of, like, music was a great connector in this book. Of young people everywhere love to listen to
Yeah.
loads of the same music, no matter where they are.
Yeah, I mean, I coming back again to, like, I was at a festival in Croatia about 3 years ago with a writer who had grown up in Bosnia at the middle of the night, and we were talking. We were exactly the same age, and we were talking about what we were doing. And she was saying how annoyed she was because she couldn't get blur tapes, because basically it was being shelled all the time. And in my context as a teenager, kind of exoticized people who were growing up in other conflicts from us. They weren't teenagers who also wanted a poster of Damon Albarn for that. And just that wee thing of, like, we have music in common, the same bands, the same things. It really it made me feel connected and kind of yeah, like it was really important, and I wanted to bring that up. The song No Limits is a kind of theme song for the kids throughout the whole book. And I'm sure over across Europe that summer, everybody was probably had that same earworm in their head. And I will say, all credit to them, to Unlimited, were delighted to be included in a literary fiction novel and gave us free rein for no money to use it as much as possible. So I'm hoping for a To Unlimited collaboration at some stage.
Huge thanks to Two Unlimited for making that possible. Jan, I have one last question for you today from our audience. This one is: are there other characters from your shorter fiction that you've been inspired to use in a full novel?
Ooh, yes. Now, I hope there are not people listening who read everything, but there are characters that pop up over and over and over again, and I just changed their name or changed their gender. So there was a character in my very first novel called Cunningham Holt, who was an old man that was afraid that he was blind, and he was afraid that the world was sinking around him, and he couldn't control it. And Cunningham Holt, that theme appears. He's in The Last Resort as well. He's in a couple of short stories, but it was a similar to vibe to some of the kids here, where I just really liked him. The thing about a character is, when you're writing a book, it takes about a year to write it. It takes another year to edit it. Then you talk about it for 2 years, and by that stage, you know your characters better than you know some people in your own family. And it's really hard to park them and go, I'm never going to spend time with that person again. So I do tend to haul them out and reuse them. The other thing that I will say is I'm a super, super lazy researcher. And so I tend to mostly just write myself over and over again. So there is so much of me in lots of my characters that there have been little Jans appearing, just old Jan, younger Jan, male Jan, Jan who's a farmer, like over and over again. So yeah, if you look too closely, you'll be able to see the joins, I think.
I think a lot of writers don't admit that, but I've often thought that myself.
Sure, where else do they get their ideas from if they're not writing what they know and who they are?
Yeah, I think writing what you know, that's what we really want. I think as a reader, that's what I want. I want a little bit of someone's life in that. Maybe the crime novelist would disagree with me though.
Oh, I
Hopefully.
think the crime novelists are the worst. I think they just vent into their characters all of the awful things that they really want to do. Because I know I really, really love writing main characters.
Mm-hmm.
And you can just put all of the things that you would really like to say to people into the mouths of main characters and then say, oh, it's just fiction. I made it all up.
It's a good get out clause. Well, if you are a crime novelist and you would like to agree or disagree with Jan, or if you are not a writer but you wanted to let us know what you thought about this event, you are very welcome to tweet on Twitter, use the hashtag PBF22, or please fill in the short survey that you is available in the chat and that you will be emailed after the event. My massive thanks to Jan for that really brilliant conversation. I couldn't think of a better way of spending my time than talking to Jan Carson, and I'm really delighted that I was able to share that with all of you today. And huge thanks as well to Paisley Book Festival for making today's event possible. A final reminder that you can buy Jan's book, The Raptures, and other books from writers appearing at the festival at bookshop.org. And please do drop us a line and let us know what you thought about the event today. We'd really love to hear from you. Thank you so much to everybody for coming along today. Your support is so appreciated. Thanks very much.
Thank you.